Hey everybody, welcome back to the Hard4Games channel, and today we have a very special treat. We have a beta version demo of the original Shantae for the Game Boy Color. It has a rearranged dungeon, it has unused animations and enemies, among other things, little tweaks here and there, all over the place. This demo, among other game demos, artwork, scripts, and more, was founded by Jerry LongWoodGeek Martin. I'd like to give him a big thank you for the work he put into this. He had purchased several DVDs at auction recently, and one just so happened to be a content backup from an executive at a game company. Despite this, I should note no names or personal information will be released, but we will be talking about the games that we found. Now, we're going to get into the game and the differences, but I should note here that the game itself is silent. There is no music and no sound effects whatsoever. At first, I thought this was a mistake with my emulator, so I tried another emulator. And then we also tried it on real hardware, and nothing. We even took a look at the ROM data, and if there is any sound in there, it isn't accessed by a normal playthrough. So this is silent. You will hear a little bit of music in the background, but I've added that in editing just so it isn't like dead silent. But no, the game itself, the demo, has no sound. Alright, so booting it up, we do get a rudimentary demo version. Shantae, press start, very basic title sequence here. And when we press start, we have the menu, which again is very basic. They described it as a debug menu, and if you're familiar with the code that brings you into the debug menu in the retail version of the game, this should look familiar. It is the same information, same layout, same colors, etc. We're going to briefly showcase what each one of these menu items do, how they connect, and then we're going to dive deeper into them. So this is the intro itself. This should look familiar if you have played the game. Second up, we have the Labyrinth or Dribbble Fountain. Third option is Scarecrow Fields. And the last option just brings us back to the title screen. So as you'll see, the world is kind of put together differently here. I'm at Dribbble Fountain, I go to the left, I'm in Scarecrow Fields. I go to the right, and I'm at the Scuttletown Gates. And then after Scuttletown, I'm at Scarecrow Fields. So everything's just sort of rearranged and simplified compared to the retail version of the game. Scarecrow Fields actually loops around to Dribbble Fountain. And just for reference, here's the retail version of the game. Scuttletown, I go to the left, totally different area. Whereas if I go to the right, I'm in Scarecrow Fields. So here's the introduction to the game. If you've played the retail version, this should look familiar. It's pretty much the same, but there's no dialogue here. Now pay attention to the cannonballs here. You may notice something interesting. Aside from the fact that I'm bad at this game and keep getting hit. At the end of the boardwalk, the same thing that happens in the retail version happens here, but without dialogue. And there's no Scuttletown. It just goes back to the menu. For reference, here's the retail version of the game. Starts off the same, but like I mentioned, you get dialogue. Same thing with the ending, you get an introduction to Risky Boots, and there's dialogue. Now I mentioned the cannonballs earlier. Here's the retail version of the game, and notice that the cannonballs have shadows. It's a tell for the player, right? So you see the shadow and you're like, oh, I want to avoid being in that area. They also always hit the boardwalk. Here's the demo version. no shadow, and no tell. And the only time that the cannonballs hit the boardwalk is when it's supposed to hit and break it apart. Otherwise, it just goes in front of it. So here's the demo version again. We are at Scarecrow Fields, and the layout here is pretty much the same, the difference being the enemies. There's only one type of enemy here, being these scarecrow creatures. Their animations, the way they die, etc. seem pretty much the same. It's just that there's less variety. Here's the retail version of the game where you have to contend with these little guys that throw spears at you. Also, to my knowledge, there is no day-night cycle in the demo version of the game. Alright, on to Dribbble Fountain. It automatically opens up for you, unlike the retail version of the game. You enter and you talk to Risky Boots, and she actually references this being a demo. In the retail version of the game, Bolo opens this area up for you, and of course there's different dialogue with Risky Boots. Now there is just a ton of little differences within the labyrinth itself. So here's an example of a small one. These vases that Shantae has to break open, they're laid out differently, and there are more of them in the retail version of the game. But again, that's a sort of a small difference. Here's a bigger one. An enemy redesign. In the retail version of the game, the enemy's a little bit cuter. It has 2 eyes. In the pre-release, it has 3 eyes. So here's an example of a totally different layout. You're making your way up here, climbing up vertically, and then there's this hallway that you can enter into in the demo version. And there's a ton of different goodies you can get. You keep going, and then there's an area that I assume you'd have to scale up as the monkey. But here's the same area in the retail version of the game. You're climbing up, climbing up, climbing up. And that hallway just doesn't exist. Here we have a different death animation for an enemy. Strangely, in the demo, this water enemy kind of bursts into molten rock and melts when you kill it. The retail version is much more appropriate. The enemy just sort of turns into bubbles and explodes. Here's the demo, and in the same room, in the retail version, you rescue a baby warp squid. The warp squids do not exist in the demo. Take a look at this key animation. It's very, very bouncy in this bubble, and when it's hit, it flashes back and forth between red and gold, or yellow. In the retail version, it's much less bouncy. The key is bigger, and it's just a sort of gold yellowish color. Overall, there are a ton of differences here. Here's another instance where you would get a squid, but in the demo version, it's a 1-up. There's also a difference in the layout of the room where it's much easier to escape the fire-breathing statue on the way out. In the retail version of the game, it's somewhat elevated, there's water underneath, and you have to jump while timing the fire. And here is the last room in the demo version. It just sort of ends. And there's kind of this glitched out statue thing here. In the retail version of the game, this is where you would rescue the Guardian. So thank you all for watching. I really appreciate it. I also really appreciate the opportunity to finally play this game because honestly, I've only heard good things, but I've never gotten the chance to do it. But now I've got to play 2 different versions of it, which is pretty cool. And you will also be able to play this version. The owner has graciously decided to release this via Forest of Illusion in about 1 week's time. I will keep you posted regarding that. So stay tuned to our social media. We'll be retweeting it when he makes the announcement that it's live. And aside from that, we'll see you all next time.